One thing that I'm seeing that confuses a lot of late diagnosed autistic people is the idea that everything that we ever did was masking, and that if we adapt or develop a skill or change in any way fundamentally, that is somehow being inauthentic and it actually sits under the umbrella of masking. But that is not actually how identity works. And sometimes the difference needs explaining explicitly because we might not, as autistic people, naturally infer the difference. And that's the part that I do here. Hi, I'm Jade. I'm a private psychotherapist and I run Planet Pure, a place where I help autistic people begin to understand themselves and learn to like themselves rather than continue to blame themselves. And I'm going to be running a workshop on this because I think that three things are getting mixed up here, which is masking, configurations of self, which I learned at university when I was doing my counselling degree, and growth. And I wanted to explain the differences. I remember learning about configurations of self when I was at university, and I remember thinking, I do that. And then I realised, hey, everybody does it, but the difference is that people are always being themselves, but a slightly more fitting version depending on the environment. So that might look like you might be a little bit more silly with a close friend, you might be more professional with your boss, and maybe a bit more relaxed, a bit more comfortable with your mum. The key difference here is that all the configurations of self come from the same baseline of self. They're still you. But I think that a lot of autistic people look at that and think, well, that must be masking, because that's kind of the vague definition that I've been given, but it's not. Masking is different. Masking usually develops when you've had a lot of feedback about the way that you naturally are. And the feedback is often that the way that you naturally are is wrong. You're too blunt, you're too sensitive, you're too intense, you're too different. So instead of just adjusting how you express yourself in that new environment, you start completely replacing yourself. And what I didn't fully realise at the time was that when I was learning about configurations of self, was that I actually don't experience it in the same way, because actually what I was experiencing was masking. Because when you've been masking for so long, you will have different versions of you, but the different versions of you are coming from a safe or secure baseline or relationship with yourself. They're coming from trying to avoid rejection, or they're coming from not knowing yourself or not having a relationship with yourself because you've abandoned yourself and replaced it with wanting attachment to others, which is a very different thing. And then on top of that, the thing that I also want to mention is where growth comes in, because real growth usually doesn't come from a place of fear, stress, or tension. It actually comes from self-actualization and understanding who you actually are, and then building your life from that place. So the workshop that I'm going to be doing is going to be unpacking this properly and what we can do about it, the difference between masking, configurations of self, and genuine growth. Because once you understand the difference, you stop feeling like you have to choose between becoming and being yourself, and becoming and being capable of growth, and becoming more than the way that life might currently feel for you. I think the differentiation is so important that it needs speaking about more.